There is an exercise that NATO runs periodically in the desert regions of Djibouti, a small nation on the Horn of Africa where France maintains its largest permanent overseas military base, and where temperatures routinely exceed 50 degrees Celsius in direct sunlight. This exercise brings together units from multiple NATO and partner nations to test interoperability, tactical capability, and operational endurance in one of the most punishing environments on Earth. Most units that participate perform adequately. They complete their objectives. They maintain operational capability. They survive the heat and return to their home nations with lessons learned and boxes checked. But in one particular iteration of this exercise, 2 units did something that nobody expected. They did not just perform. They performed so far beyond every other participating force that the exercise evaluators were forced to recalibrate their assessment criteria, because the existing scoring framework could not adequately capture the gap between these 2 units and everyone else. And then these 2 units were pitted against each other in a head-to-head tactical evaluation that produced results so extraordinary that the after-action report was briefed directly to NATO command staff, not as a routine exercise summary, but as a strategic assessment of capability that the alliance needed to understand. The 2 units were the French Foreign Legion's 2nd Foreign Parachute Regiment, 2 Rep, and the British Parachute Regiment's 3rd Battalion, 3 Para. And what happened between them over 72 hours in the Djiboutian desert revealed truths about military excellence that challenged assumptions held at the highest levels of the Western Alliance. I need to tell you about these 2 units before I take you into the desert, because the comparison between them is not the comparison most people expect. On the surface, they appear similar. Both are airborne infantry. Both are considered elite within their respective national armies. Both have distinguished combat records spanning decades. Both select for physical toughness, mental resilience, and aggressive fighting spirit. But beneath these surface similarities lie 2 of the most fundamentally different approaches to building a soldier that exist anywhere in the Western military world. And those differences, invisible in garrison and indistinguishable at a passing-out parade, become starkly visible when the temperature hits 50 degrees and the mission demands everything a human being can give. The French Foreign Legion is unlike any other military formation in the Western world. It is a volunteer force composed almost entirely of foreign nationals who serve France in exchange for the possibility of French citizenship after 3 years of service. Legionnaires come from over 150 countries. They arrive at the Legionnaires recruitment centers in Aubagne with backgrounds that range from former ONO Special Forces operators seeking a fresh start to young men from developing nations seeking opportunity to individuals running from pasts they want to leave behind. The Legion does not care who you were, it cares only about who you are willing to become. And what it will make you become is something that no other Western military attempts to create. Legion basic training lasts approximately 16 weeks, which sounds comparable to other Western infantry training programs. It is not comparable. Legion basic training is an immersive psychological reconstruction process that strips away the recruit's previous identity and replaces it with a new one built entirely around the Legion. Recruits are given new names. They're separated from their native language groups and forced to communicate in French, which many of them do not speak when they arrive. They are subjected to physical training that is not merely demanding but deliberately excessive. Designed not to build fitness but to break individual identity and rebuild it within a collective framework. The attrition rate during Legion basic training varies but frequently exceeds 40%. And the men who wash out are not always the weakest. Sometimes they are the strongest, the most individually capable, the most physically gifted. Because the Legion is not looking for the strongest individual, it is looking for men who will subordinate everything, their identity, their comfort, their survival instinct, their individual will, to the Legion itself. Legio Patria Nostra. The Legion is our homeland. This is not a motto. It is a psychological reality that is deliberately constructed during training and maintained throughout a Legionnaire service. The Legion replaces family, nationality, personal history, and individual ambition with a single, all-consuming institutional identity. And this replacement produces soldiers who have a relationship with suffering that is qualitatively different from anything produced by any other Western military. The British Parachute Regiment builds a different kind of soldier through a different process that produces a different but equally extraordinary result. I have covered P Company in detail before, so I will focus on the specific attributes that become relevant in the desert comparison. The paras select for what they call controlled aggression and refusal to quit. P Company's test week is designed to identify individuals who will keep moving forward regardless of physical suffering, regardless of the apparent hopelessness of the situation, regardless of every rational reason to stop. The paras do not reconstruct identity the way the Legion does. They do not strip away individuality and replace it with institutional identity. Instead, they find individuals who already possess an innate refusal to accept defeat, and they channel that refusal into regimental culture. The result is a soldier whose motivation comes from a different source than the Legionnaires. The Legionnaire endures because the Legion is all they have. Their identity is the institution, and the institution demands endurance. The para endures because something inside them personally refuses to stop. Their identity remains their own, but their identity is defined by the act of not quitting. Two different psychological architectures producing two different types of endurance. And in the desert, both types are tested to their absolute limits. Let me take you to Djibouti, because the desert is where these philosophical differences produce observable tactical consequences. The exercise scenario is a 72-hour operational evaluation combining a long-range desert patrol, deliberate attack on a defended position, and a defensive phase against a counterattacking force. Each phase is evaluated independently and scored against standardized NATO criteria. Units are assessed on tactical effectiveness, unit cohesion, leadership, endurance, and a category that the evaluators call operational sustainability, which measures the unit's ability to maintain combat capability over the full 72 hours without significant degradation. The ambient temperature during the exercise ranges from 38 degrees at night to 52 degrees during the day. Humidity is negligible. Water resupply is limited to simulate contested logistics. Each soldier carries a standard combat load plus 6 liters of water, which in these conditions provides approximately 8 hours of hydration before resupply is needed. The terrain is flat, open, and completely exposed. There is no shade. There is no cover from the sun. There's nowhere to hide from the heat. Before the tactical phases begin, both units must complete a 30-kilometer approach march to their start lines. This march takes place during the early morning hours to avoid peak heat, but even pre-dawn temperatures in Djibouti hover around 35 degrees. The march is loaded. Full combat equipment plus water, plus ammunition, plus mission essential stores. Total carried weight per soldier is approximately 40 kilograms. And this march, before the exercise has even properly begun, is where the first differences emerge. The Legion moves with a pace and rhythm that reflects decades of desert operational experience. The 2-Rep is based in Corsica, but deploys regularly to Djibouti, Chad, Mali, and other African operational areas. Desert operations are not a specialty for the Legion, they're routine. The regiment has been operating in African deserts continuously since its formation, and before that, the Legion's predecessor units fought in Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and Syria, going back to the 1830s. Almost 200 years of institutional desert experience has produced a doctrine of desert movement that is refined to an extraordinary degree. The Legion marches in a specific formation optimized for desert conditions. Spacing between soldiers is wider than standard European tactical formation to reduce the psychological effect of seeing others struggle. The pace is controlled by the most experienced sous-officiers, who set a rhythm that is sustainable over the full distance. Water discipline is enforced not by individual soldiers but by the chain of command. You drink when you are told to drink. You drink the amount you are told to drink. You do not drink more, and you do not drink less. Seems oppressive by modern Western military standards, where individual hydration management is considered a personal responsibility. But the Legion learned through 2 centuries of desert experience that individual soldiers in extreme heat make catastrophically poor hydration decisions. They either drink too much too early, depleting their supply before the march is complete, or they ration too aggressively, arriving at the objective in a state of dehydration that degrades their combat effectiveness for hours afterward. Centralized hydration management eliminates both errors. It is paternalistic. It is controlling. It works. The paras approach the march differently, and the difference reflects their institutional culture. The paras do not have the Legion's depth of desert experience. Their operational history is weighted toward temperate and cold environments. The Falklands, Northern Ireland, Northern Europe, with significant but more recent experience in hot climates through Iraq and Afghanistan. Their desert doctrine is competent, but not as deeply embedded as the Legion's. What the paras bring instead is the characteristic that defines them above all others: the refusal to be beaten. The approach march becomes, in the minds of the para soldiers, a competition, not an official competition. Nobody has declared it a race. But the paras know the Legion is conducting the same march on a parallel route, and the regimental culture of 3 para will not permit them to arrive second. The pace increases, not dramatically, subtly. The platoon sergeants who should be controlling the pace are themselves products of P Company's culture of relentless forward movement. The instinct to push harder, move faster, arrive first is so deeply embedded in the regimental DNA that it overrides the tactical logic of energy conservation in extreme heat. The paras complete the approach march 17 minutes ahead of the Legion. They arrive at their start line, having covered 30 kilometers faster than any other unit in the exercise. And they are already in deficit. Not a dramatic deficit, but a visible deficit. A subtle physiological deficit that will compound over the next 60 hours and create consequences that nobody anticipates. The first tactical phase is a deliberate attack on a defended position. Both units must assault a fortified objective held by an opposing force drawn from the Djiboutian military. The attack takes place during the hottest part of the day, which is a deliberately sadistic scheduling decision by the exercise planners designed to test operational capability under maximum heat stress. Temperature at the time of the attack is 49 degrees Celsius. In these conditions, sustained physical exertion is not merely uncomfortable, it is physiologically dangerous. Core body temperature rises rapidly during intense activity. Cognitive function degrades, decision-making slows, fine motor skills deteriorate. The risk of heat stroke, a potentially fatal condition, becomes significant after as little as 30 minutes of intense physical effort. The Legion S attack is characterized by something that the NATO evaluators initially score as a weakness, but later reassess as a profound strength. It is slow, not hesitant, not poorly executed. Deliberately, methodically, almost ponderously slow. The assault elements move with a controlled pace that keeps physical exertion below the threshold where heat casualties become likely. Fire support is used extensively to compensate for the reduced speed of movement. The Legion has learned through generations of desert combat that the unit which arrives at the objective with its soldiers still functional wins. The unit which sprints to the objective and arrives with soldiers collapsing from heat exhaustion has captured ground it cannot hold. Speed of assault is a virtue in temperate climates. In extreme heat, it is a liability. The Legion's assault takes approximately 40 minutes from line of departure to objective secured. By NATO evaluation standards designed for European operations, this is unacceptably slow. By the standards of forces who have fought in these conditions for 2 centuries, it is precisely correct. The paras attack is magnificent and troubling in equal measure. It is fast, violent, aggressive, and executed with the characteristic paraferocity that has been the regiment's hallmark since Arnhem. The assault elements close with the objective at a speed that genuinely impresses the NATO evaluators. Fire and movement is crisp. Section commanders lead from the front. The objective is secured in under 20 minutes, less than half the time the Legion took. On paper, and by the scoring criteria, the paras have outperformed the Legion in the attack phase. But the cost is visible within minutes of the objective being secured. 3 para soldiers require medical intervention for heat-related conditions. 7 more are showing symptoms of heat exhaustion, reduced cognitive function. Excessive sweating followed by cessation of sweating, which is a dangerous warning sign, and core temperature readings above 39 degrees. The unit's immediate combat effectiveness on the objective is degraded because a significant percentage of its soldiers need recovery time before they can perform at their normal standard. The Legion has 0 heat casualties. Every legionnaire who started the assault is combat effective at its conclusion. The position they hold is fully manned and ready for the next phase. The evaluators face a scoring dilemma that reveals the limitations of standardized assessment criteria. The paras scored higher in the attack phase because the criteria reward speed, aggression, and tactical execution. The Legion scored lower because their deliberate pace is penalized by criteria designed for temperate operations. But the Para's higher score came at a cost in combat power that will affect their performance in the next phase. While the Legion's lower score preserved combat power that will give them an advantage going forward, the criteria measure performance in the moment. They do not measure the sustainability of that performance over time. And in a 72-hour exercise, sustainability is everything. The defensive phase begins 6 hours after the attack. Both units must defend the positions they have captured against a counterattack by the opposing force. This phase takes place during the night, which should favor the Paras given British forces' well-documented superiority in night operations. The defensive layout reflects the sophisticated understanding of ground defense that British infantry training produces. But the Para soldiers manning these positions are carrying the physiological debt of the approach march and the aggressive assault. Heat exposure has a cumulative effect that is not fully appreciated by forces without extensive desert experience. The body does not reset overnight. Core temperature may return to normal, but cellular damage from heat stress persists. Dehydration, even when corrected by rehydration, leaves residual effects on cognitive function and physical performance for up to 24 hours. The Paras are defending their position with soldiers whose bodies are still recovering from the exertions of the previous 12 hours. And recovery in 35-degree nighttime temperatures is slower and less complete than recovery in the 15-degree nights these soldiers are accustomed to. The Legion's defensive position is established with the same methodical deliberation that characterized their assault. Positions are prepared carefully. Overhead shade is improvised from available materials. A standard Legion desert practice that is not part of the defensive doctrine of most European forces. Soldiers are rotated through rest and observation cycles on a schedule that maximizes recovery. And the Legionnaires are managing something that the Paras have not prioritized because their institutional culture does not emphasize it. Recovery as a tactical activity. In the Legion, rest is not something that happens when the mission permits. Rest is a component of the mission. In extreme heat, a commander who does not manage his soldiers. Recovery is a commander who is destroying his own combat power as surely as if the enemy were inflicting casualties. This understanding is embedded in Legion doctrine at every level. Section commanders monitor their soldiers' hydration, food intake, rest, and heat exposure, with the same attention they give to ammunition states and equipment serviceability. A Legionnaire's body is a weapon system. It requires maintenance. And in the desert, maintenance means shade, water, food, and sleep provided on a disciplined schedule regardless of what else is happening. The counterattack comes at 0300. Both units engage the opposing force effectively. Tactically, there is little to separate them. Both demonstrate the skills that their selection and training have instilled. The Paras fight with their characteristic aggression. The Legion fights with their characteristic discipline. Both hold their positions, both repel the counterattack. But the evaluators note a difference in the quality of performance that is difficult to quantify, but impossible to ignore. The Paras' reactions are slightly slower than expected. Their fire control is slightly less precise. Their communication is slightly less crisp. These are marginal differences that most observers would not notice. But the NATO evaluators are professionals whose entire job is noticing marginal differences, and they note them consistently across the Para position. The assessment is not that the Paras are performing poorly, they are performing well. They are simply performing below their own known standard by a margin that is consistent. With the residual effects of heat stress and incomplete recovery, the Legion is performing exactly at its known standard because its soldiers have been managed to maintain that standard through deliberate recovery protocols. By the 48-hour mark, the divergence has become significant enough to surprise the senior evaluators. The Paras, one of the finest infantry units in the world, are showing measurable degradation in operational effectiveness. Not catastrophic degradation, not combat ineffective levels, but a steady erosion of performance that is trending in a direction the evaluators find concerning. Additional heat casualties have occurred. Water consumption is exceeding planned rates, which creates logistical pressure. Sleep quality in the extreme heat is poor, leading to cumulative fatigue. Individual soldier morale remains high because para morale is essentially indestructible. but physical capability is declining. The Legion at the same 48-hour mark is performing almost identically to how it performed at the start of the exercise. This is the result that shocked NATO command. Not that the Legion was performing well. The Legion was expected to perform well in the desert.
Was the sustainability gap.
The difference between the rate at which the Para's capability degraded and the rate at which the Legion's capability degraded over the same period in the same conditions was so significant that the evaluators described it as the most important finding of the exercise. And this finding matters far beyond 2 units in a desert because it illuminates a problem that NATO has not adequately addressed. The alliance's fitness standards, tactical doctrine, and operational planning are built around an assumption of relatively short-duration, high-intensity operations. Western military thinking, shaped by 20 years of counterinsurgency, assumes that elite forces will be deployed for specific missions of limited duration with reliable logistics, medical support, and recovery infrastructure. The ability to sustain operational effectiveness over extended periods in extreme environments without these support systems is not a capability that NATO has prioritized because the operational paradigm has not demanded it. The Legion's performance in Djibouti demonstrates what a force optimized for sustained operations in austere environments looks like. And it does not look like the fastest, strongest, most aggressive force on the battlefield. It looks like the most disciplined, the most experienced, and the most carefully managed force on the battlefield. These are not qualities that Western military culture currently celebrates. Discipline is valued in theory, but aggression is valued in practice. Experience is respected, but innovation is rewarded. Careful management sounds like caution, and caution is not a word that elite units want associated with their identity. The Para's performance in this exercise is not a failure. I want to be absolutely clear about this. The Parachute Regiment demonstrated exactly the qualities it is designed to produce: aggression, determination, tactical excellence, and refusal to accept defeat. These qualities are magnificent in the right context. In the Falklands, in Helmand, in the environments where the Paras have built their legend, these qualities produce results that no other unit can match. But the desert punishes aggression that is not matched by environmental adaptation. An environmental adaptation requires either the kind of institutional experience the Legion has accumulated over 2 centuries or a willingness to subordinate regimental culture to environmental reality, which is something no elite unit does easily or willingly. The after-action review produces recommendations that are politically sensitive within the alliance because they implicitly challenge the training philosophies of multiple member nations. The primary recommendation is that NATO needs to develop doctrine for sustained operations in extreme heat environments that prioritizes force preservation over tactical speed. This recommendation directly contradicts the offensive philosophy that dominates Western infantry thinking. The secondary recommendation is that NATO should study the Legion's hydration and recovery management protocols for potential adoption across the alliance. This recommendation is diplomatically awkward because it suggests that a single French unit has solved a problem that no other NATO army has adequately addressed. The tertiary recommendation is that the alliance's fitness and readiness standards should include sustained load-bearing performance in extreme heat as a measurable criterion. This recommendation has implications for every member nation's training program and is therefore guaranteed to be resisted by every member nation's training establishment. What I find most valuable about this exercise is what it reveals about the nature of military excellence. We tend to think of elite forces in terms of peak performance, the fastest assault, the most aggressive attack, the highest fitness scores, the most demanding selection. But peak performance is a momentary phenomenon. It is what you can do for 20 minutes at maximum effort. Sustained performance is what you can do for 72 hours at operational tempo, and the two are not the same thing. They are not even correlated in the way most people assume. The force that produces the highest peak performance may not be the force that produces the most sustainable performance. And in a real conflict, sustainable performance wins wars, while peak performance wins engagements. The Legion understands this because its institutional history is a history of sustained campaigns in harsh environments. Algeria, Indochina, Sub-Saharan Africa. 2 centuries of operations where the enemy was as much the environment as the opposing force. This history has produced a military culture that values endurance over explosiveness, sustainability over speed, and collective management over individual heroics. These values are not exciting. They do not make compelling recruitment videos. They do not produce the kind of dramatic moments that build regimental legends. But they keep soldiers fighting when other forces have been consumed by the environment they are operating in. The paras understand something different but equally valuable. They understand that the will to win, the absolute refusal to accept defeat, the willingness to push beyond any rational limit to achieve the objective, is a force multiplier that no amount of careful management can replace. There are moments in combat where the only thing that saves you is a soldier or a unit that will not stop, that will keep attacking when the situation is hopeless, that will keep fighting when every logical assessment says withdrawal is the correct decision. The paras have this quality. They've proven it repeatedly, from Arnhem to Goose Green to Musakala, and no amount of desert acclimatization doctrine can produce it.
Oh.
The result that shocked NATO command was not that one unit was better than the other. It was that two forms of military excellence, both extraordinary, both proven in combat, both representing the highest achievements of their respective military cultures, produced dramatically different outcomes when applied in the same extreme environment. The Legion's excellence was sustainable. The Paras' excellence was explosive, and the desert rewarded sustainability over explosiveness by a margin that forced NATO to reconsider how it evaluates, trains, and deploys its forces in extreme heat environments. The implications extend beyond desert warfare. As climate change increases global temperatures, as potential conflict zones shift toward hotter regions, as the alliance confronts the possibility of sustained operations in environments that exceed the design parameters of most NATO forces, training and doctrine, the lessons of this exercise become increasingly relevant. The force that can sustain itself in extreme conditions will outlast the force that can only perform in them briefly. And outlasting your enemy is not a dramatic capability, is not celebrated in movies or recruitment campaigns. But it is, in the end, the capability that determines who holds the ground when the fighting stops. The French Foreign Legion and the British Parachute Regiment remain among the finest military formations in the Western world. Neither is diminished by this comparison. Both demonstrated capabilities that the other lacks, and together, within the framework of NATO cooperation, they represent a combination of sustainable endurance and explosive fighting power that no adversary should want to face. The exercise in Djibouti did not produce a winner and a loser. It produced a lesson about what excellence looks like when the temperature rises past 50 degrees and the mission lasts longer than your peak performance can sustain. And that lesson, briefed to NATO command staff and distributed across the alliance, may prove more valuable than any weapon system or technological advantage in the conflicts that lie ahead. So tell me what you want to see next. I am developing an analysis of why German mountain troops and Norwegian ski soldiers approach the same alpine warfare problem from completely opposite directions, and why a joint exercise in the Austrian Alps produced results that neither nation expected. Or perhaps you want to understand why Australian infantry units have developed a unique approach to operating in extreme heat that contradicts both French and British methodology and may actually be more effective than either in their specific operational context. The answer involves indigenous knowledge that military planners have only recently begun to take seriously. Drop your preference in the comments if this analysis changed how you think about what makes a military unit truly elite in extreme environments. Subscribe now, because next week I am releasing a video about a NATO exercise that tested urban warfare capability across 12 nations simultaneously, and the results embarrassed several countries so thoroughly that 2 of them formally protested the evaluation methodology rather than accept the findings. You should definitely want to see that one.